This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello. This is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is a show where we take a look at the week's events, happenings in the world of politics, happenings in the world of technology, entertainment, everything that affects our lives, everything that we interact with during our week. And we take a look at it from a higher perspective. And from a higher perspective, I'm talking about a spiritual perspective, or you might also call it a metaphysical perspective. And from a metaphysical perspective, what we're talking about is the idea that what we engage with in our lives on an everyday basis in the mundane world is something that we create for ourselves on a higher level. Because we are divine mind. We are higher than we understand in our everyday lives. We are creators. We are ultimately powerful in ways that we don't really comprehend on an everyday level. So what I mean by that is, we live in the world, and we think that we are powerless in many ways. We think that we are our jobs or our families or our communities. And while that's all a part of everything that we are more than that. We are oneness. We are connected at a very powerful level. And what we do is to create versions of ourselves. You could call them avatars that allow us to play. And forgive me for using the word play. I know it sounds frivolous, especially when you're dealing with things of what most people would consider a pretty serious level. But at this level that I'm talking about, it's all play because none of it is real. It is not who we really are. We are not our bodies. We are more than that. So in our creations, in our versions of ourselves where we are powerless, where we are afraid, we are not enough, we learn an awful lot. We play by the rules of a particular game that says, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And then we change that game. Because ultimately that's what it is. So when we interact with whatever we interact with, particularly in the news media, we tend to, react. And we tend to let our buttons get pushed. But it's important to take that step back and to understand what's really going on here. And who and what we really are. So that's what the show is about. It's a way I've chosen to help me focus on that particular perspective. Because goodness, the world can seem like such an overwhelming place if you forget what your connections are, if you forget who and what you really are. And on a day like today, where we have, another major story about some tragedies happening in this one's in Florida here. It's necessary to keep that frame of mind. It really is. So, been off for 2 weeks, and our last show was about happiness in what I'm calling the transition era. The transition era is this time that we're living in where things are changing rapidly. We are, well, the seeds of major social change, political change, but more importantly, change in how we see the world and how we understand the world. This is happening rapidly, and the fallout of that, I won't say it's fallout, but what happens when we begin to change our perspective, when we begin to understand more about the world, you have these changes happening. You have a dawning awareness of what we could be. And that dawning awareness creates the change that I'm talking about. But along with this dawning awareness, you have this pullback that comes out of fear. So we're going through this interesting time of, taking these steps forward and then pulling back. So in some cases, you're seeing rapid change on situations that have been static for many, 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 many years. For example, you look at what's happening with, the concept of gay marriage. That's overwhelmingly changing and getting support across the country that for decades just never happened. Racial awareness too is changing. Was it last summer or perhaps the summer before when there was another one of these awful shootings that was very racially motivated, by the way. It was shootings in a Atlanta church, I believe, that was targeting black people, and this gentleman had on his pickup truck and all over his home these Confederate flags. And the Confederate flag has long been something that's been distasteful to many people, certainly people of African American origin. And yet to, object to that, to say, please don't wave that flag in my face, was not heard. I mean, it was, I can wave that flag wherever I want to wave it because it's my right as an American to disregard your, your feelings about anything. But finally, after that shooting, and it took decades of, complaining about this, these Confederate flags are not allowed in public, publicly or government-owned buildings. Shops like Walmart, for instance, won't sell them anymore. Now, if only we could do this with guns. If only we get this enlightened about guns, where Walmart won't sell you a gun anymore. Or will sell it to you only under very, very specific and stringent standards. Then, perhaps, we'd have a change in mind that would lessen the frequency of tragedies like what happened in Orlando last night. I know I'm still catching up on this, so bear with me. But it seems that someone who, someone is named Omar Mateen, went into a nightclub, which was a gay nightclub, by the way, and just shot a lot of people, took hostages, and finally was shot by police. And it seems that this was an attack motivated by hatred about gay people. And they're calling this one of the worst mass shootings in the last 25 years. But, how do you gauge that? How do you gauge that when for the past 10 years, really 10 years, every year we've been assaulted by these horrific assaults? It's increasing at a very, very dramatic level. In 2007, here, in my neck of the woods, there was this massacre at Virginia Tech. A college, okay? A college where people go to learn. And 32 people died that day. And why? Because, and I'm not going to blame this all on guns, although the proliferation of those is another issue to talk about. But I'm going to dovetail this into my topic, the part 2 of my topic here today, which is happiness, how to be happy. So there's a lot of miserable people out there, people unhappy about their lives and about other people living their lives the way they want to live their lives. And much of it comes from, what we talked about in the last episode was, where does happiness come from? What makes people happy? And from what the research shows us, from what the experts have looked into and explained, what we know is happiness comes out of a sense of connection, out of a sense of connectedness, a commonality, a feeling of being part of a community, an essential part of a community, that you matter, that what you do, what you say, matters to people and matters in your environment. And the idea of connection, connectedness, is something that we are grappling with as a community. On the one hand, we have amazing technology that connects us in ways we couldn't be connected before. And yet many people still feel an alienation, a feeling of disconnectedness. And that's interesting because we are so interconnected at this point. And what I tweet on Twitter, reaches out to, as many people as can read it, and affects them, But the connectedness that I'm talking about, the connectedness that seems to bring the happiness, doesn't necessarily have to do with that technology. I've read articles about, the happiest places to live on Earth, and they're all usually not very big towns where people kind of know each other and are comfortable with each other and say hello and work together. And I think that's the kind of connection that we're missing. And on the higher level, the spiritual level, it's an understanding. It's a remembering that is needed. It's a remembering that we are connected. We are all one. We are all each other. And knowing that at that transcendent level can really change how you see the world. The word religion, and I don't talk about religion all that much on this show, though I do, mention it, and we certainly talk about, other religions, but this isn't a religious show. This is a show that has to do with spirituality and wellness. And my point has always been that spirituality and religion are not the same thing. In fact, they are quite often working at odds with each other. But the word religion, the actual meaning of religion, comes from a Greek word, religio. And religio means relinking, reconnecting. Religions were meant to remind us of our divine connection with each other, our oneness with divine mind. That's what religions were meant to do. That's what the meaning of religion is. Most of the time they don't do that anymore because religions have become institutions, and institutions are concerned with keeping themselves going and keeping themselves alive, and the rules and regulations that they insist upon, rather than helping the individual to understand their own spirituality, to be connected with that, and to take charge of it. So many people give up that that ability to be in charge of their own spirituality. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that spirituality is a powerful thing, and many people don't understand what it means because it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey of understanding, and many people don't want to really be bothered with thinking about those things. So it's much easier to turn it over to a source, a entity that will tell you exactly what it all means. And these are the rules, and if you play by these rules, everything's going to be fine. And that's what religions do. They make things that aren't simple seem simple in many ways. They make people, or they take the burden that that some people feel about these questions of life and why am I here and what happens when I die? All of these questions that we have as human beings. Well, yeah, you turn to a religious institution and they'll tell you exactly what all that means. They'll tell you how you should think. They tell you, what you should do. They tell you what your behavior ought to be. And they tell you how to, pass away, how to leave this world and enter a world of, heaven or conversely, you don't do it, you end up in the bad place. So religion, the word, is meant to remind us of our connectedness. And that connectedness is the source of our joy. It's the source of our happiness. And when we forget it, when we, in our false beliefs, don't understand our connections, and when we're told we don't have them, or we're told, there are, when we're told we're separate, that we're separate from the divine mind, from God, and I don't usually use the G word because some people find that a little alarming, but I'll use it in this case. But religions often teach that we are separate from God, and that God is this entity that's judging us. But also, in those same religions, if you look closely at what they are actually saying, if you look closely at their sacred texts, it tells you that God is us, is a part of us, and we are part of God. So, disconnection or misconnection or a misunderstanding of our connectedness is at the heart of all of these things. Now, I mentioned, another tragedy that happened, a while ago, regarding, the musician Prince. And I told you that, when we have these very public mourning events, they mean something to the world, and certainly Prince's passing was that. And I mentioned that one of the things that it would bring to light was the addiction to opioids and the overprescription of opioids. Well, in the news this past week or so, they finally confirmed the fact that Prince had been addicted to painkillers due to the fact that he had hip surgery. He had a lot of pain in his legs because of the very athletic dancing that he did for a living. And so these painkillers, and there's a lot of discussion, were they prescribed, or who prescribed them? Obviously they were prescribed. This is a man who was known, in an industry that is, riddled with people who take drugs, like they're candy. This is a man who never did that. This is a man who never indulged in, recreational drugs of any kind, would not allow drugs or alcohol in his home, which was frequented by many, many people. And so that he would die of a drug overdose is really saying something. It's really saying something, and it's a bit annoying to me, uh, you know, in the press where they're not talking about this. They're trying to blame him as if he were a drug addict and that he went and got these things were prescribed to him. They're prescription drugs. And so they were prescribed to him, and he had gotten addicted, and he knew he was addicted, and he was on his way to try to remedy that. He had contacted a doctor who was going to help him go through, rehab to get away from this addiction. But unfortunately, this powerful opioid, killed him before he had a chance to straighten out. And this drug is so powerful that even a slight, overdose or mistaking can, kill you. So, I talked about happiness and the need to kind of numb yourself that the opioids address. And there's an article here. It's in the Washington Post in a small town called Jasper, Alabama. It's a article about a woman named Jessica. She works at a fast food joint, and she's trying to recover from an addiction to opioids. And it's very interesting that people who have, are feeling, there's a feeling of despair that these drugs take away. In this case, in this article, they're talking about how the global economy decimated, the jobs, coal mining jobs that were the mainstay of this little community. And then you have these pharmaceutical companies marketing these painkillers. And doctors overprescribing them or prescribing them with not much thought because they're trying to please their patients. Their patients are in pain. They want a remedy for that pain. And so the doctor does it. But the fact is that, it seems like people are in a place that's so lonely, so painful, that these pills make them, or make that loneliness go away for a while until it wears off. And I talked about, by the way, the rising death rate of, in one particular, particularly in the South, among one particular demographic, which is white working class women, and these women that work in rural areas. So that's what this article is about. And their deaths are coming out of opioid drugs, suicide and alcohol. And a sense of anxiety, a sense of loss of security, and ultimately loss of connection. That's what it's all about. And so it's not surprising that people will get addicted to things that make them feel better or make that sense of loneliness go away. This particular woman had a spinal injury in high school when she was playing volleyball in the 10th grade. And she was prescribed OxyContin. And by 17, she was addicted. She was, snorting these pills, crushing and snorting them. And she could get prescriptions for these pills because of her condition. And she went through, periods where she was not addicted, and then she went into relapse. She had a child and then lost custody because she went to jail. And, these addictions have really destroyed people's lives. And you might say, well, aren't these weak people? Aren't these people that just, they are on drugs and they don't, have the willpower or the stamina or the discipline to take themselves off it? And I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think that these drugs are so powerful that you can easily become addicted to them. And it's not so easy to get unaddicted once that process happens. So, once again, being happy is a matter of this idea of connectedness. And when that's taken away from us, or when we are under the illusion that we are not connected, that's when these painful things happen. When those painful things happen, the result are actions and consequences that, we don't have, we don't know exactly what will happen. Once that takes place, you have desperate people who are lonely and unhappy. They may take that out by reaching for a gun and going into a club like this man did and shooting people, or a school and shooting people. They may take it out on themselves by committing suicide or, poisoning themselves. It's an era where we have to learn about that connectedness, about that sacredness. And that's what's happening. That's the awareness that is dawning. We are more and more aware of our connectedness every day. But again, as I said, the main modus operandi of this time we live in, this transition era, is movement forward and then pull back. And that's what we're going through with, our awareness of happiness and connectedness, More understanding, and then fear pulls us back. So, I think that's all that I have to say on that matter. And I hope that you find your connectedness in the world around you, and the people that you love, and the space you inhabit, and beyond. And allow that to bring your happiness to you. Have a good week.